Hello, my name is Martin Lipscomb, and in this conversation I'm joined by Associate Professor Pam Grace. Pam works at the Cornell School of Nursing, Boston College, Boston, Massachusetts in New England, USA. The college, which its website states, is grounded on Jesuit ideals. However, although it's called a college, this is an Americanism, and it's actually a research-intensive university. Now, Pam is an ethicist, best known perhaps for the book, now in its third edition, Nursing Ethics and Professional Responsibility in Advanced Practice. Pam has published widely and has also contributed to a variety of important reports, including those of the Hastings Centre. Today, I've asked Pam to discuss the ways in which potentially normative values often closely associated with or reflecting ethical and moral precepts, play out in research. And to this end, I'd like to begin by asking some questions about quantitative and then qualitative research. And I'll begin with quantitative. Okay, quantitative researchers, or perhaps more accurately, quantitative methodologists, frequently reference the metaphysical concept of objectivity in relation to quantitative research. And this concept can be contrasted with or against subjectivity. And rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, values, particularly ethical and moral values, may be thought about as being, in key respects, subjective, where subjective supposes that values are purely or primarily personal and individual. They're held subjectively within ourselves. Now, Pam, please, what do you think here? Do you accept or reject the idea that values are subjective in the sense commonly supposed, and by that I'm assuming held within ourselves, or are they in large measure historical, social and cultural constructions?
Yeah, so I think everybody is a product of their cultural, contextual situation. And so the values that they hold in that sense are constructed socially from the influences that people around them or their environment have in a way inculcated into them. I think values can be examined to look at if they're consistent with each other and if they help you get into a place of comfort in some way. Now, I think that personal values are always subjective, and then even the sort of the profession you go into, if you like, is dictated in some ways by the values you hold that are subjective. So I would say that there are no values that are inherent, and I would say there's probably no real values that are absolute. They all have to do with context and with what provides some good for us in our mind. Okay. So I don't know if that really quite gets at what you're talking about, but I think we always have to think about what we're valuing, why we're valuing it, and have a critical eye whether it fits in with the rest of our system of values.
Okay. Let's think about value neutrality and value neutrality's relationship with objectivity. So let me begin by presuming value neutrality and objectivity are aligned, if not synonymous. Can quantitative researchers really proceed objectively rather, where or if objective signifies value neutrality? Perhaps value neutrality might be approached, it might be feasible to be value neutral when we think about mathematical and physical science, albeit that our reasons for studying these topics will be value laden. However, for example, research into quarks or distant galaxies needn't be heavily evaluative in the way it's conducted. On the other hand, that said, is value neutrality a realistic goal or ambition when quantitative researchers operate in health science? That is, science about people. Indeed, should value neutrality be a goal here? Why assume, if indeed it is assumed, that this thing is necessary or desirable?
Yeah, I know. I think value neutrality is an impossibility, in fact, because what you're studying and how you're studying it, regardless of how rigorous your methodology is or your method is, it's always contaminated slightly by why you're doing it, especially health sciences. So it might be that you say to yourself, well, I'm just doing this because I'm interested in the problem, but you still would have to trace back the value of why should I pursue something that I'm interested in? What are the other influences on that? What are the other values that are maybe a little bit more subtle or not so obvious? But I think value neutrality is not possible and not always, and the value neutrality is not always desirable, because in fact, there are things that we want to achieve, and whatever pulsed us, if you like, or propelled us in that direction is inevitably influenced by values, whether they're overtly understood values or more implicitly subconscious, that we haven't sort of made ourselves aware of what those values are.
Okay, thank you. Now, following on from that, let me ask you a question about qualitative research then. I think this does follow on. Qualitative researchers, perhaps more so than quantitative researchers, often lace their reports with words and phrases that carry normative weight. And by that I mean here words and phrases which invoke ethical and moral ideas or positions. Now, that's not a criticism. Given that qualitative researchers investigate human experience and meaning, it's probably impossible for them to do otherwise. These invocations are in many respects integral to language and to communication and to understanding. Nonetheless, potentially, do you think this is a problem? When you read qualitative reports and when you notice how normative assumptions are incorporated into the presentation of findings, as an ethicist, as someone attuned to noticing such things, do you think it would be better if these sorts of assumptions were made overt? Is a more critical voice needed in articulating the values that appear in qualitative research?
Yeah, so I think particularly with qualitative research, the intent of the qualitative research is to understand a certain group of people's experience of something, which inevitably, if we go back to what I said earlier about the values, implicit or explicit, they're always contaminated by the values that the people that you're asking about the experience have. And so they're not really generalizable to larger groups without some further maybe quantitative evaluation of those experiences. So for example, if it's a group of people say that they experience hospitalization as a really terrible experience, especially for a certain illness because of the way they're treated, so maybe a minority group, we can't extrapolate their insights about their experiences to other groups of people in other places at other times. It would require a much bigger study to do that. But qualitative research, if it's contained within this idea that what you're getting is someone, a particular group of people's experiences, that can provide us some insights for how to attend to the care of that group in that situation that we can then check perhaps in other research.
Okay.
So the real problem when qualitative researchers say, so this is how it is, because it isn't how it is, it's only how it is for these people. And even then, it might not be really how it is, because you might not have got at everything. Anyway, yes.
And is it possible to describe experience without bringing in words and phrases which are so value laden, so value encrusted, that communication itself requires that encrustation? Or should an attempt be made to recognize the values which are being presented? Is that feasible?
Yeah, I would say that if you're talking about a relatively good qualitative study, you do need to try and bring to the surface what your perspective on that is and how you might incorporate your values into it. And so, you know, for example, I did a study one time with a group of nurses that had been touted as good nurses. And so I interviewed them to find out, like, all the common characteristics in this group of people who are considered good nurses. But of course, I had a particular idea of what a good nurse was because of all my years of studying this. So I really had to be very careful. And I found that the hardest thing in doing the interviews is not to want them to say things that I wanted them to say, you know, to sort of hold that back. So you have to recognize that you have this impulse. And I think there are ways to do qualitative research where you can lessen that, where you say, so, you know, something like, so you've been recommended to me as someone who other people think is a good nurse. So I'm interested in finding out, you know, what's going on with you. So could you give me an example of what you think a good nurse is? That way I'm not, you know, I'm assuming, yeah, that this person is actually a good nurse, but they might not be from my perspective, but I have to hold that to one side because I'm not interested in what I think. I'm interested in what they think. It's tricky. It is very tricky.
In our literature about methods, methodologies, research, is enough attention, do you think, given to the way in which values run through and structure and give form to the arguments which we present in our research?
No, I think that that wasn't an open-ended question, but no, not at all. And I think, especially in healthcare, it's getting more narrow in terms of the idea of, if you like, philosophical inquiry into our assumptions and the assumptions we're making and the values we're relying on. And I think we don't pay near enough attention to that. And now we're not even very good at educating our students who are coming up to do research to be thinking that way. So I do worry about the fact that people do not seriously think to themselves, now what assumption am I making here? What's underlying this? Why am I following this branch of research? And sort of trying to get that out on the table, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. I think both in any kind of research, the lack of critical look at the values behind that are problematic, and they're really problematic in the days when we're looking for research monies from certain entities that can actually steer what we're studying to their ends rather than out what we might value.
Okay, and maybe we should leave it on that slightly gnomic note there. Pam, thank you very much for your time. That was very interesting. Thank you for talking to me today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And good luck to everybody. Bye.
Cheerio, Pam.